Calling this a retro review is really pushing the envelope for sure. This movie came out in 2019, but since I didn't see it when it first came out, I'm calling it a retro review, which apparently now means anything that came out a year or more from when I post the video. Make sense? Never Grow Old is a Western starring Emile Hirsch and John Cusack. Real quick rundown about what's going on here. Emile Hirsch plays an undertaker in a fairly peaceful, idyllic town in the West that is taken over by John Cusack and some other baddies, and as the town's moral compass starts to shift, the bodies start to pile up, which is good for Emile Hirsch being the Undertaker. But is he going to be able to live with himself? That's the basic plot, and we're not going to get into anything else. We'll get some things I didn't like out of the way first. John Cusack was not great in this role. He's trying, and good for him, but he's really no different than any other role he's ever done, and most of those roles are in comedies. His deliveries are perfectly suited for stuff like Grosse Pointe Blank, High Fidelity, and even America's Sweethearts. All great movies. Heck, it even worked in 1408. But here, he's supposed to be this terrible, bloodthirsty cowboy, and while sure, he does some pretty terrible things, he never feels like a huge threat. The movie tells me he is, sure, but it never felt like, oh no, John Cusack is here. It will always be, hey guys, John Cusack is here, let's get this party started. And the movie had a few inconsistencies in the way that it emphasized certain scenes. An example is one of the funerals, and there are a few here. It gets cut short when the preacher almost faints and his fall is broken by the Undertaker. The preacher and his wife get very offended that the Undertaker is touching him because they don't like what he has come to represent by that point, and then once the preacher gets his footing, he and the rest of the funeral party just sort of storm off. The problem is that the funeral had just started, and it can be argued that it was the most important funeral in the entire movie. Way to not let your emotions get the better of you, preacher. It's silly and made no sense, especially since the preacher had been shown to be a truly God-fearing man and had overseen every other funeral that came before. Outside of stuff like that, the movie is fairly well done and serviceable, but it could have been so much better. It's a story of saints versus sinners and one man caught in the middle who is just trying to survive the world around him and do what is right by his family. There's a great story there, even potential for a cinematic gem, but mediocre talent behind the camera and a miscasting on the part of the main antagonist hold it back. Maybe it was poor direction, poor editing, or a combination of both, but the movie feels like it should have been epic, and it wasn't. Where were the sweeping wide shots of the planes or the establishing shots to give us a sense of dread when the bad guys are around? It felt very closed in and personal, and while that can work sometimes, here it made it feel a little too generic and probably why we found it in the discount bin. On the topic of editing, there is one scene in particular where two characters draw down on each other. You've seen it 100 times, and it's usually a pretty cool way for a couple characters to go out. The problem here is that one of the characters had the other one dead to rights. And there is so much time before they fire. It was like, no, go ahead. Get your gun. I'll wait. No, go ahead. You good? Bang, bang! I'm sure someone would argue hesitation on that character's part, but the fight that preceded this standoff throws that argument out the window. So, some tighter editing to reduce the amount of time that character is shown pointing their gun at the other would have helped that scene out greatly. The set design and costumes were awesome. It reminded me a lot of Red Dead Redemption 2 when it came to the look of the film, and that's a huge plus. But it's just another shame in the end because the rest of the movie really doesn't stack up. It's a violent, dirty look at one scenario that I'm sure did play out in countless little dusty towns back then. Not a pleasant time to be alive, I'm sure. It's just too bad that it didn't quite reach the levels it deserved to be at. It's hard to recommend or even compare to other movies. If you like westerns, then you've probably already seen Never Grow Old, and if not, this movie is not going to change your mind about the genre. So what about you? Have you seen Never Grow Old? We're calling it a retro movie at this point, so let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below, and I'll see you all in the next one.